The air in the lodge lobby was thick with the scent of pine and old money, a combination that always made my shoulders tighten. It smelled of comfort I'd never quite felt I was entitled to. I was here for solitude, a self-prescribed treatment for a life that had become a series of gray, meticulously planned rectangles. My apartment, my office, my entire existence in the city. I designed beautiful, functional spaces for other people to live in, while my own life felt like an empty blueprint. This trip was meant to be a break from the straight lines, a week of breathing in the chaos of nature, and maybe, just maybe, feeling something other than the quiet, persistent hum of loneliness. The woman at the reception desk, Clara, had a name tag and an expression of deep, professional panic. She was whispering into the phone, her voice a frantic hiss. I waited, pretending to study a brochure for local hiking trails, my overnight bag a dead weight at my feet. The lobby was grand, all dark wood and exposed beams, with a cavernous stone fireplace that was currently dormant. It was the kind of place that prided itself on seamless, rustic luxury. A problem was a disruption to the carefully curated fantasy. Clara finally hung up, her smile a brittle, painted-on thing. "Mr. Albright," she said, her voice a little too bright. "My deepest apologies for the wait. We seem to have a situation. A situation?" I repeated, my own voice flat. I was too tired for situations. I just wanted a key, a room with a view of something that wasn't another building, and a bottle of overpriced whiskey from the minibar. "A small booking error," she said, her fingers fluttering over the keyboard as if the right combination of taps could undo the mistake. "A digital ghost in the machine, you could say. We are completely overbooked." My heart sank. Not with anger, but with a weary resignation that felt all too familiar. Of course, even my escape was flawed. "So you don't have a room for me, we have a room," she corrected, her eyes darting towards the heavy oak door that had just swung open, letting in a gust of cool, damp air. "The Blackwood Suite. Our last one. The trouble is." A man stepped inside, shaking rain from a dark jacket. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his Henley. His hair was a dark, unruly mess, and his face held the kind of easy, roguish confidence that I'd always observed from a safe distance. He moved with a loose-limbed grace, his worn leather boots making a soft, solid sound on the slate floor. He dropped a camera bag next to my own sensible suitcase. It looked like it had seen more of the world than I had. He ambled up to the desk, giving Clara a slow, charming smile that seemed to momentarily short-circuit her panic. "Julian Croft," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "Checking in. Hope I'm not too late to catch the sunset." Clara swallowed, her professional composure visibly cracking. She looked from him to me, a trapped animal caught between two equally inconvenient truths. "Mr. Croft. Welcome." "Yes. About that." She took a deep breath. "It seems we have double-booked the Blackwood Suite." He looked at me then. His eyes were a startling shade of green, flecked with gold, and they held a spark of amusement, not annoyance. He took in my creased travel clothes, my tense posture, my entire aura of quiet desperation. A corner of his mouth ticked upward. I felt scrutinized, catalogued, and surprisingly, not dismissed. I prepared for the inevitable argument, the jockeying for position, the demand for a manager. It was the city way. But Julian just leaned an elbow on the polished counter, his gaze still holding mine. "Double booked, huh? So one of us gets the suite, and the other gets what?" "A very comfortable bench in the lobby. We would of course offer a full refund and a voucher for a future stay," Clara stammered, wringing her hands. "We could try to find lodging in town, but with the film festival." "No, no," Julian said, waving a dismissive hand. He turned his full attention back to me. The world seemed to narrow to the space between us, the scent of his rain-damp jacket cutting through the pine and polish. "What do you say, pal? You look like you could use a break as much as I could." I didn't know what to say. I was the architect, the planner. My brain was already trying to solve the logistics, calculate the odds, find the optimal path. But there was no optimal path. Julian reached across the counter and plucked the single, solitary room key from Clara's trembling fingers. It was attached to a heavy brass fob shaped like a pine cone. He held it up, dangling it in the space between us, a glint of challenge in his eyes. The light from the antler chandelier caught the metal, making it gleam. Then he smiled, a full, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "We'll share," the words hung in the air, simple and declarative. It wasn't a question. It was a solution, presented with such casual certainty that arguing felt ridiculous. It was absurd. I didn't share rooms with strangers. I barely shared an elevator with strangers without feeling a prickle of anxiety. But the alternative was driving back down the winding mountain road in the dark, defeated. Or worse, trying to find another sterile, soulless hotel room. I looked at the key, then back at his face. At the unapologetic confidence. At the faint hint of a dare in his expression. For the first time in what felt like years, a decision was being made for me. And the strangest part was the wave of relief that washed over me. A surrender. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. Just one word, undoing a lifetime of carefully constructed boundaries. Julian's smile widened. He tossed the key in the air, caught it with a deft flick of his wrist, and then slid it across the counter to me. "You drive a hard bargain," he said, his voice laced with a humor that made my stomach do a slow, unfamiliar flip. "You can have the first shower." The Blackwood suite was less a room and more a small, self-contained cabin grafted onto the side of the lodge. It had a vaulted ceiling with massive wooden beams, a stone fireplace that mirrored the one in the lobby, and a wall of windows that looked out onto a dense forest of pine trees, their branches heavy with mist. And in the center of it all, magnificent and imposing and utterly singular, was one king-sized bed. One bed. My mind, which had been blissfully quiet for the past 10 minutes, roared back to life. Of course. A suite. A romantic getaway package. One bed. I stood frozen in the doorway, my sensible suitcase suddenly feeling foolish and out of place in this cathedral of rustic romance. Julian brushed past me, his shoulder a solid, warm presence against my arm for a fraction of a second too long. He dropped his worn camera bag on a leather armchair and whistled, a low, appreciative sound. "Well, look at this place. Not bad." The brochure didn't do it justice. He seemed completely unfazed by the sleeping arrangement, or at least, he was far better at pretending than I was. I watched him move around the room, his energy filling the space. He ran a hand over the rough-hewn mantelpiece, peered out the window, and tested the firmness of the armchair. He was a man comfortable in his own skin, at home in any environment. I felt like an exhibit in a museum of awkwardness. "I can take the couch," I said, my voice coming out tight. The couch was a love seat, really, an overstuffed piece of furniture that looked better suited to displaying decorative pillows than accommodating a full-grown man. Julian turned, an eyebrow raised. He glanced at the love seat, then at the sprawling expanse of the bed, then back at me. A slow grin spread across his face, the same one from the lobby. It was infuriatingly charming. "Don't be a martyr. It's a king-sized bed. We could host a small dinner party on it, and still have room. I promise I don't bite. Unless you're into that." Of course, he winked. A full, unambiguous wink. My brain stuttered. Was he flirting? Was this just how he was? A playful confidence that bordered on audacious? I had no frame of reference for this kind of interaction. My social life consisted of polite, professional conversations with clients and stilted small talk with my neighbors. "I'll take that shower now," I mumbled, grabbing my bag and retreating to the bathroom before I could make an even bigger fool of myself. The bathroom was an oasis of slate and steam. I turned the water on as hot as I could stand it, hoping the noise would drown out the frantic thumping of my own heart. I leaned against the cool tile, letting the water sluice over me, and tried to process the last half hour. I was sharing a room, a suite with one bed, with a complete stranger. A handsome, confident, infuriatingly nonchalant stranger who had just made a joke about biting. My life was a fortress of solitude I had built brick by brick. I worked from home most days, ordered groceries online, and considered a trip to the dry cleaners a major social outing. I hadn't touched another person in a way that wasn't accidental or professional and I couldn't remember how long. And now this. Julian Croft, a human wrecking ball of charisma, had just smashed through my carefully constructed walls without even trying. When I emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a fluffy hotel robe, the room was transformed. A fire was crackling in the hearth, casting a warm, flickering glow on the wood-paneled walls. The lamps were on, their light soft and inviting. And Julian was sitting in one of the armchairs, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, a second glass waiting on the small table between the chairs. The scent of wood smoke and whiskey filled the air. He looked up as I entered, and his smile was softer this time, less of a challenge and more of an invitation. "Figured we deserved a drink after all that," he said, nodding toward the empty glass. "It's a decent single malt. Help yourself." I hesitated. This was escalating. Sharing a room was a logistical necessity. Sharing a drink by the fire felt intimate. It felt like a date. My mind screamed at me to decline, to retreat to my designated side of the bed and pretend to sleep. But my body, traitor that it was, moved toward the chair. I picked up the glass. The crystal was heavy and cool in my hand. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I sat down, keeping a careful distance, acutely aware of the robe and the fact that I was wearing nothing underneath it. We sat in silence for a long moment. The only sounds the crackle of the fire and the distant sigh of the wind in the pines. It should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. It was a comfortable silence, weighted with unspoken questions. I watched the firelight play across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the slight stubble that shadowed it. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring into the flames, a thoughtful, almost distant expression in his eyes. He was a photographer, I remembered. He saw the world through a lens, composing it, capturing it. I wondered what he saw when he looked at me. A problem to be solved? An awkward travel companion? Or something else? "So, Leo Albright," he said, his voice soft, breaking the quiet. He'd seen my name on the reservation screen. "What brings an architect all the way out here? Running from a bad blueprint?" The question was perceptive, hitting a little too close to home. "Something like that," I admitted, swirling the whiskey in my glass. "Just needed a change of scenery." "Too many straight lines," he nodded, taking a slow sip of his drink. "I get that. My whole life is about avoiding straight lines. Chasing the light, you know? Trying to catch a moment before it disappears." He turned his head and looked at me, his green eyes seeming to absorb the firelight. "You spend your life building things that are meant to last. I spend mine capturing things that are gone in a second." Funny, isn't it? I found myself leaning forward, drawn in by his words, by the quiet intensity in his gaze. "I've never thought of it like that. Most people don't," he said with a small shrug. "They see a pretty picture. They don't see the 5 hours of waiting for the sun to be in the right place, or the 100 shots you throw away to get the one that feels true." He paused, his eyes holding mine. "What do you want to build, Leo? If you could build anything for yourself, with no client, no budget, what would it be?" No one had ever asked me that. My work was about fulfilling the visions of others. My own vision. I hadn't looked at it in years. The question unearthed a deep, forgotten well of yearning inside me. "A cabin," I said, the word surprising me as much as it did him. "Small. On a lake. Lots of windows. A place where the lines between inside and outside are blurred. A place to not be lonely." The last part one didn't say aloud, but I felt it echo in the space between us. Julian's expression softened. The playful instigator was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he understood everything I wasn't saying. "That sounds nice," he said, his voice a low murmur. "A place to come home to." He finished his whiskey and stood up, stretching his arms over his head. The movement was fluid and unself-conscious, pulling the fabric of his Henley taut across his chest. I averted my eyes, my own drink suddenly feeling warm in my hand. "Well," he said, his voice back to its usual easygoing tone, "I'm gonna hit the shower. Don't wait up." I sat by the fire long after he disappeared into the bathroom, the water hissing through the pipes. I replayed our conversation in my head. He had a way of cutting through the polite surfaces of things, of asking questions that mattered. He saw me, or at least, he was trying to. When he came out, he was wearing a pair of soft-looking gray sweatpants and an old t-shirt. His hair was damp and curling at the ends. He smelled of hotel soap and something else, something uniquely him. He didn't say anything, just walked over to the bed, pulled back the covers on the side farthest from the door, and slid in. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. I drained my glass, the whiskey burning a trail down my throat, and stood up on shaky legs. I walked to my side of the bed, the plush carpet silencing my footsteps. I could feel his presence, the warmth of his body radiating through the thick comforter. I slipped under the covers, my movements stiff and awkward. The sheets were cool and crisp. The bed was enormous, a vast continent of mattress between us, but I was acutely aware of him, of his breathing, of the subtle shift of his weight as he settled. I lay on my back, staring up at the dark, beamed ceiling, my body rigid. "Leo," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "Yeah." My voice was a croak. "Relax," he said softly. "It's just a bed," but it wasn't just a bed. It was a shared space, a breach in my defenses, an admission of proximity that felt more significant than anything I had done in years. I closed my eyes, trying to force my muscles to unclench. I listened to the sound of his breathing, slow and steady, until it evened out into the gentle rhythm of sleep. And only then, surrounded by the scent of wood smoke and the presence of the stranger beside me, did I finally begin to drift off, falling into a deeper, more peaceful sleep than I had known in a very long time. I woke to the soft, gray light of dawn filtering through the massive windows. For a moment, I was disoriented, the unfamiliar ceiling and the scent of pine confusing my senses. Then I remembered. Julian. The bed. I turned my head slowly, cautiously. He was still there, lying on his stomach, one arm thrown over his head, the other tucked under his pillow. His face was turned towards me, his expression peaceful in sleep. The morning light softened the sharp angles of his face, catching in the dark stubble on his jaw. His breathing was a deep, quiet whisper in the stillness of the room. I lay there, just watching him. It felt transgressive, like I was stealing a glimpse of something private. In sleep, the confident, playful armor was gone. He just looked peaceful, vulnerable. A wave of something warm and unfamiliar washed over me. It wasn't just attraction, though there was certainly that. It was a feeling of connection, a strange sense of rightness at finding him here, in this space with me. I had spent so much of my life observing people from a distance, through windows, across crowded rooms. Now, here was someone right next to me, close enough to touch, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt larger. He stirred, a low murmur escaping his lips, and I quickly shut my eyes, feigning sleep. My heart was pounding, a ridiculous schoolboy reaction. I felt the bed shift as he rolled onto his back. I could feel his awareness, his wakefulness. The air between us crackled with a new kind of tension. The nighttime truce of sleep was over. Now we were two conscious people, sharing an intimate space in the light of day. "I know you're awake," he said, his voice thick with sleep. "I can hear you thinking." I opened my eyes. He was looking at the ceiling, a faint smile playing on his lips. "My thoughts are very loud," I admitted, my voice rough. "You should get them insulated," he quipped, turning his head to look at me. His green eyes were clear, a little sleepy, and held no trace of awkwardness. "Morning, morning," I replied, a small smile touching my own lips despite myself. "Coffee?" he asked. "I saw an espresso machine over there. I'm useless without it." I might even bite. For real this time, the ease with which he referenced the previous night's joke was disarming. He wasn't going to let this be weird. He was setting the tone, and it was one of comfortable, teasing normalcy. I felt a surge of gratitude. Coffee would be great. He swung his legs out of bed, and I was treated to the sight of his bare back, a wide expanse of smooth skin and defined muscle. He moved with the same easy grace, completely unself-conscious as he padded over to the small kitchenette area and began fiddling with the machine. I watched the way the muscles in his shoulders shifted as he worked, the casual way he ran a hand through his already messy hair. This was the core of my problem. I was an observer. I noticed things. The way the light hit the back of his neck. The low, focused hum he made as he concentrated on the machine. The worn softness of his gray t-shirt. Each detail was a tiny piece of a puzzle I was desperately trying to solve. A puzzle called Julian Croft. But it was more than that. I was noticing these things not as an architect assessing a structure, but as a man who was profoundly, deeply lonely. He brought 2 steaming mugs over, handing one to me before settling back into his side of the bed, leaning against the headboard. "So," he said, taking a sip, "what's the plan for today, Mr. Albright? More brooding by the fire, or are you going to venture out into the great, scary wilderness?" "I was thinking of a hike," I said, the hot ceramic of the mug warming my hands. "There's a trail that leads to a waterfall." I had studied the brochure, of course. I had a plan. "A waterfall, huh?" He looked at me over the rim of his mug, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Sounds like a place you could find some crooked lines. He took another long swallow of coffee. Mind if I tag along? I've got my camera. And besides, I should probably make sure you don't get eaten by a bear. You have a distinctly easy-to-eat vibe about you, I laughed. A real, actual laugh. The sound was rusty, unfamiliar. Is that your professional assessment? Absolutely, he said, his expression mock serious. As a professional chaser of light and avoider of bears, I feel it's my duty, and just like that, it was decided. We were going on a hike. Together. It was absurd. 24 hours ago, I was in my sterile apartment, planning a week of monastic solitude. Now I was sharing a bed and planning a hike with a man who felt like he had stepped out of a different, more vibrant reality. The trail was damp from the overnight rain, and the air was crisp and smelled of wet earth and pine needles. The forest floor was a chaotic tapestry of moss-covered rocks, fallen logs, and tangled roots. It was everything my city life was not. Julian walked with a long, easy stride, his camera bouncing against his hip. I found myself struggling to keep up, my office soft body protesting the incline. He seemed to sense it, slowing his pace to match mine without comment. We walked in a comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds the crunch of our boots on the trail and the chirping of unseen birds. Julian would occasionally stop, his head cocked, listening. Then he would raise his camera, the click of the shutter a sharp, clean sound in the stillness. He wasn't just taking pictures of the grand vistas. He was capturing the small things. The way a fern uncurled, the intricate pattern of lichen on a rock, the way the light filtered through the canopy and dappled the path ahead. "What are you shooting?" I asked, catching my breath as he paused to frame a shot of a mushroom cluster. He lowered the camera, a look of intense focus softening as he glanced at me. "The details," he said. "That's where the story is. Anyone can take a picture of a mountain, but it takes patience to see the life that's happening at its feet." He gestured with the camera. "It's like your buildings. The grand design is impressive, but the real genius is in the joinery, the way the materials meet, the things most people never notice." I was struck again by his perception. He saw the world with an artist's eye, but he also had an uncanny ability to see me, to understand the language of my own quiet profession and translate it into his. We reached a tricky part of the trail where a small stream had washed away a section of the path, leaving a slick, muddy bank we had to scramble across. Julian went first, navigating it with an athlete's ease. He turned on the other side, his boots planted firmly, and held out a hand to me. "Here," he said. "It's slippery." I looked at his outstretched hand. It was strong and steady, with long fingers and clean, short nails. A working hand. I hesitated for only a second before placing my own hand in his. His grip was firm, his skin warm and slightly rough. A jolt, a current of electricity, shot up my arm. It was such a simple, practical gesture, but it felt monumental. His fingers tightened around mine as I found my footing, his strength a solid anchor in the unstable terrain. He didn't let go immediately. For a long moment, we stood there on the other side of the stream, our hands still clasped, the sound of the rushing water filling the space between us. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, a small, almost imperceptible movement. My breath caught in my throat. I looked up and met his eyes. The playful amusement was gone, replaced by something deeper, more serious. An unasked question. He finally released my hand, the loss of contact leaving my skin feeling cold. He cleared his throat and gestured up the trail. Waterfall should be just ahead. The mood had shifted. The easy camaraderie was now charged with an unspoken tension. We walked the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was filled with the memory of that touch, the warmth of his hand, the look in his eyes. I was hyper-aware of him, of the space between our bodies as we walked, of the way his arm would occasionally brush against mine. Each point of contact was a spark igniting a fire deep inside me, a fire I had thought long extinguished. The waterfall was beautiful, a cascade of white water tumbling over mossy green rocks into a clear, cold pool. The air was cool with its spray, but I barely saw it. My attention was entirely on Julian. He had his camera up, but he wasn't shooting the waterfall. He was pointed down the trail, back the way we had come. Then, he lowered the camera and turned to me. "I didn't take a single picture of the waterfall," he said, his voice quiet, almost a confession. "What were you taking a picture of?" I asked, my heart starting to pound again. He took a step closer. We were standing on a flat ledge of rock, the mist from the falls clinging to our clothes. He was so close I could see the individual flecks of gold in his green eyes, could smell the scent of pine and damp earth on his jacket. I was trying to capture the way the light looked on your face when you thought I wasn't looking, he said, his voice a low, intimate rumble that was nearly lost in the roar of the water. The world tilted on its axis. My carefully constructed fortress, already breached, was now crumbling to dust. He saw me. He hadn't just been seeing the light, or the details, or the story. He had been seeing me. The observer had become the observed. I am an architect. I build things with clear lines and solid foundations. My life is a blueprint. But in that moment, standing by a waterfall with a man I had known for less than a day, all my plans, all my rules, all my carefully measured distances became meaningless. I was in uncharted territory, without a map, without a compass. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't scared. I was hopeful. He didn't touch me. He just held my gaze, his own unwavering, letting his words settle in the space between us. It was more powerful than any physical contact. It was an admission, a confession that mirrored the one my own heart was silently screaming. The roar of the waterfall seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the roaring in my own ears. The hike back to the lodge was a blur. The charged silence had returned, but it was heavier now, thick with possibility. Every accidental brush of our arms, every shared glance, felt like a chapter in a story that was being written in real time. We were no longer two strangers sharing a room out of necessity. We were two people orbiting a shared, unspoken truth. Back in the suite, the comfortable domesticity of the previous night felt like a distant memory. The air was electric. I stripped off my muddy boots and damp socks, my movements clumsy. Julian did the same, his actions as fluid and graceful as ever. He seemed to be waiting, giving me the space to set the tone, to react to his confession at the waterfall. But I had no idea how to react. My entire emotional vocabulary consisted of shades of gray. He had just introduced vibrant, terrifying color. I retreated to the shower, the excuse of being muddy a welcome shield. The hot water did little to calm the frantic energy buzzing under my skin. His words echoed in my head. The way the light looked on your face. He had been watching me with the same intensity that I had been watching him. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. I wasn't alone in my observation. It was a shared fascination, a mutual orbit. When I came out, he was standing by the large windows, looking out at the darkening forest. The fire wasn't lit. The room was filled with the cool, blue light of twilight. He had changed into a clean shirt, and he was holding the two whiskey glasses from the night before, both empty. He turned as I entered, his expression unreadable. "I think we're out of whiskey," he said, his voice neutral. It was a simple statement of fact, but it felt loaded, a test. Was I going to retreat, to let the moment pass? Was I going to let us slide back into the polite fiction of being just roommates? My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I am Leo Albright. I am an architect. I build walls. I create order from chaos. But the chaos he introduced into my life felt more real, more vital, than any order I had ever known. I walk across the room. My feet are bare on the cool floorboards. I stop in front of him, close enough that I can feel the warmth radiating from his body. I don't look at the glasses in his hand. I look at his face, at the question in his eyes. "Julian," I say, and my own voice sounds strange to me, full of a resolve I didn't know I possessed. "Leo," he replies, his voice a low murmur. And then I do the bravest, most reckless thing I have ever done in my entire, carefully planned life. I reach out and take the glasses from his hand, placing them on the windowsill with a soft click. His hands are empty now. I take one of them in mine. His skin is warm, his fingers lacing through mine as if they were made to be there. I raise my other hand and cup his jaw, my thumb brushing against the rough texture of his stubble. His eyes flutter shut for a second, a small, sharp intake of breath the only sound in the room. He leans into my touch, a subtle movement, a surrender. This is it, the breaking point. The confession made not with words, but with a touch that says everything. "I see you too." He opens his eyes, and the green is dark, intense. He doesn't smile. He just looks at me, a raw, unguarded vulnerability in his expression that steals the air from my lungs. You're a hard man to read, Leo, he whispers, his voice rough with emotion. But I think I'm starting to get it. And then he closes the small distance between us. His other hand comes up to rest on my hip, a solid, grounding pressure. His lips meet mine, and the world dissolves into a riot of sensation. His mouth is soft, hesitant at first, a question. Then, as I kiss him back, as I pour all my pent-up loneliness and unspoken yearning into that single point of contact, it becomes something more. It becomes an answer. The kiss is not rushed, not frantic. It is slow and deep and honest. It tastes of coffee and pine and something that is just him. It feels like a homecoming, like finding a place I didn't even know I was searching for. All the straight lines of my life curve and bend, reshaping themselves into a new, unfamiliar geometry that has him at its center. When we finally break apart, we're both breathless. He rests his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. I can feel the steady beat of his heart through his shirt, a rhythm that matches the frantic pace of my own. My hand is still on his jaw, his on my hip, our other hands still tightly clasped. We are anchored to each other, two separate entities suddenly fused into a single, shared moment. So, he murmurs, his breath warm against my lips. The cabin on the lake. Does it have one bed or two? A laugh escapes me, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. One, I whisper back, a smile spreading across my face. Definitely one. He pulls back just enough to look at me, a slow, dazzling smile of his own lighting up his face. The playful instigator is back, but his eyes hold the deep, soft warmth of the man from the fireside, the man from the waterfall. Good, he says, his voice a happy growl. Good answer. And he kisses me again, and this time there is no hesitation, no question. There is only the simple, undeniable truth of two people finding each other in an overbooked hotel, a truth more solid and real than any foundation I could ever design. The fortress was gone, and in its place, he was building something new, something with a lot of windows, and a place for us both to come home to. The morning after was different. I woke again to the gray light, but this time, the space beside me wasn't empty. Julian was there, tangled in the sheets with me, his arm slung possessively over my waist, his leg thrown over mine. His breathing was a warm, steady presence against my back. We had fallen asleep like this, after hours of talking and kissing and touching, a slow, sensual exploration that felt more intimate than anything I could have imagined. It was a mapping of new territory, a discovery of shared landscapes. A sliver of my old self, the anxious architect of solitude, tried to surface. A voice in the back of my mind whispered, "What now?" This wasn't part of any plan. This was a deviation so profound it had redrawn the entire blueprint. I felt a flicker of panic, the familiar urge to retreat, to analyze, to put distance between myself and this overwhelming feeling. What if this was just a fluke? A product of proximity and whiskey in a romantic setting? What happened when the sun was fully up, when we had to check out, when the real world with its rigid, unforgiving lines came rushing back in? I tried to slip out of his hold, needing space to let my thoughts race, but his arm tightened around me. He nuzzled his face into my shoulder, his voice a sleepy, contented rumble. Don't go anywhere. The words were a simple command, but they were also a reassurance. He wasn't running. He wasn't treating last night as a mistake. I relaxed back into his embrace, the warmth of his body seeping into mine, chasing away the chill of my anxiety. I let myself feel it, this simple, profound comfort of not being alone. For the first time, the quiet of the morning didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful, shared. We lay like that for a long time, not speaking, just breathing together as the room slowly brightened. It was a different kind of intimacy, a quiet, domestic one that felt even more real than the passionate discoveries of the night before. This was the aftermath, the calm after the storm of confession, and it was beautiful. Eventually, the need for coffee outweighed the comfort of the bed. Julian finally released me, pressing a soft, quick kiss to my shoulder blade before rolling onto his back and stretching with a groan. All right, Albright, he said, his voice still thick with sleep. Your turn to work the magic coffee machine. I think I've earned it, I smiled, pulling on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. The simple act of getting dressed in front of him felt normal, easy. The awkwardness of our first day was completely gone, replaced by a comfortable familiarity. As I made the coffee, I could feel his eyes on me. I glanced over my shoulder. He was leaning on one elbow, watching me with a soft, sleepy smile. The look was unguarded, affectionate. It made my chest ache with a feeling so new and powerful I didn't have a name for it. We drank our coffee sitting on the floor in front of the cold fireplace, our shoulders brushing. The conversation was easy, meandering. We talked about his travels, the strange and beautiful places his camera had taken him. He told me about sleeping in a Land Rover in the Serengeti to get a shot of a lioness at dawn, about getting chased by a flock of angry geese in rural France. I told him about my work, about the frustrating clients and the rare, perfect projects where everything just clicked into place. I found myself opening up in a way I never had before, sharing the small frustrations and secret passions that I usually kept locked away. He listened intently, his chin resting on his hand, his green eyes never leaving my face. He had a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. He wasn't just hearing the words. He was hearing the meaning behind them. "You love it, don't you?" he said, after I finished a long, rambling story about designing a library for a small town. The order. The idea that you can create a space that makes people feel a certain way. Safe. Inspired. Calm. I do. I admitted, surprised that he had distilled my rambling into its essential truth. But sometimes I feel like I'm building all these perfect boxes for other people, and I'm stuck outside of them. He reached out and took my hand, his thumb tracing patterns on my skin. "Maybe you just haven't found the right person to build a box with," he said softly. The words hung there, a quiet offer, a hopeful question. The test, as my anxious mind had framed it, was upon us. Checkout was at 11. It was already past 10. The fantasy of the Blackwood suite was about to end. We would have to walk out that door, get in our separate cars, and drive back to our separate lives. Was this where it ended? A beautiful, self-contained story with a beginning, a middle, and a firm, definitive end? The fear of it was a cold knot in my stomach. We packed our bags in a silence that was once again charged, but this time with the weight of impending departure. I folded my clothes with meticulous, unnecessary precision, my movements a defense against the turmoil inside me. Julian was quieter, his usual easy energy subdued. I watched him zip up his worn leather camera bag, the sound loud in the quiet room. We stood by the door, bags in hand. It felt like a precipice, a moment of choice. We could say, "This was nice," exchange a polite handshake, and walk away. My old self would have. It was the safe option. It was the lonely option. Julian took a deep breath, his shoulders rising and falling. He looked at me, his expression serious, all traces of the playful instigator gone. "Leo," he started, his voice a little rough. "I don't want this to be just the overbooked room story." Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. "Me neither." I breathed out, the words a desperate prayer. He stepped forward, closing the space between us. He didn't kiss me. He just rested his hands on my shoulders, his grip firm and grounding. "My next assignment is in the city," he said, his eyes searching mine. "Your city. I'll be there for at least a month, starting next week." Hope, bright and terrifying, bloomed in my chest. "Oh," was all I could manage. "Let me take you to dinner," he said, the words a clear, unambiguous statement of intent. A real date, not in a hotel room. No excuses, no logistics. Just you and me. This was the conscious choice. The deliberate step off the precipice and into the unknown. He was holding out his hand again, just like he had on the trail. All I had to do was take it. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. The fear was still there, a low hum in the background, but for the first time, the hope was louder. "I'd like that very much." A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of pure relief and happiness. "Good," he said. He leaned in and gave me a short, firm kiss that was full of promise. "It's a date." We walked to the front desk together, handed the single brass key back to a curious-looking Clara, and checked out. The process was mundane, normal, but it felt significant, the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. In the parking lot, the morning air was cool and clean. We stopped between my sensible sedan and his dusty, well-traveled SUV, the end of our shared space. He tossed his camera bag into the passenger seat and turned back to me. "So," he said, rocking back on his heels, his hands in his pockets. Next week, I confirmed, a smile playing on my lips. He reached out, his gesture slow and deliberate, and tucked a piece of my hair behind my ear. His fingers brushed against my skin, a fleeting, gentle touch that sent a shiver down my spine. It was a simple, intimate gesture, a quiet claim in the broad light of day. Drive safe, Leo. You too, Julian. He held my gaze for a moment longer, a silent promise passing between us. Then he got into his truck, started the engine with a low rumble, and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot. But I didn't feel alone. I got into my own car, the familiar scent of leather and stale air conditioning a stark contrast to the pine and wood smoke of the last 2 days. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, heading back down the winding mountain road, back towards the city and its straight lines. I thought about the man who had driven up this road 2 days ago, a man encased in a shell of solitude, seeking a temporary escape from a life that felt empty. He had been looking for quiet. He had been looking for a break from routine. He hadn't known that what he was really looking for was a catalyst, a disruption, a person who would see the light on his face and hold out a hand to pull him onto solid ground. The road straightened out as I left the mountains behind, the gray ribbon of the highway stretching out before me. But the world no longer looked like a series of rigid, uninspired rectangles. It looked different. It looked full of possibilities, full of crooked lines and unexpected turns. It looked full of light. I was driving back to the same apartment, the same job, the same city. But I was not the same man. I was driving towards a date. I was driving towards a beginning. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was finally, truly, on my way home.